Script: there is one prayer Sod has never said no to words. 3120. Runtime 25 min at 150 WPM. There is a man kneeling in a room with no windows. It is somewhere around the 6th century before Christ. The empire that rules the world has made it illegal, formally, officially illegal, to pray to any god except the one the king has chosen. And this man kneels anyway. 3 times a day, facing a window he has opened toward Jerusalem, a city he hasn't seen in decades. A city that is nothing but ash and rubble. His name is Daniel, and the Bible records something that I want you to hold in the front of your mind for the next 25 minutes. When Daniel prayed one particular prayer, an angel arrived, not the next morning, not 3 days later, not after a season of silence. The angel arrived while Daniel was still speaking, before he had finished the sentence. According to the text, the answer was dispatched the moment Daniel began to pray. You have probably prayed prayers that felt like they disappeared into silence. You have probably asked for something, sincerely, repeatedly, with everything you had, and heard nothing back. And if you are honest, that silence has done something to you. Maybe it made you try harder. Maybe it made you wonder if you were praying wrong. Maybe quietly, it made you wonder whether prayer works at all. This video is not going to tell you to pray harder. It is not going to give you a 7-step formula. It is not going to promise that if you believe enough, you will always get what you ask for. You have probably heard all of that before, and you are still here, which means it was not enough. What I want to show you is something different, something that took me a long time to see, and that I think you will not be able to unsee once you do. There is a type of prayer, a posture more than a formula, a shape more than a sequence, that appears again and again across Scripture. And every single time this kind of prayer shows up, the answer is yes. Not sometimes, not usually, every time. You are not someone who just watches Bible videos. You are someone who is learning to see Scripture differently, to find the pattern underneath the surface, the architecture underneath the narrative. That is exactly what you are about to do. We are going to look at 5 people who prayed this prayer. A woman who prayed so quietly that a priest thought she was drunk. A prophet who asked God to kill him. A king who turned his face to the wall and wept. A man in exile who received his answer before he finished the sentence. And someone who asked God 3 times for the same thing, and heard no. Every one of them was answered, just not always the way they expected. We are coming back to Daniel's angel. Let's start with Hannah. You know her name probably, but there is a detail in her story that almost no one notices. And once you see it, it changes how you read the whole account. The year is approximately 1100 before Christ. Hannah is a woman living in the hill country of Ephraim. She is married to a man named Elkanah who loves her, and she is barren. In a culture where a woman's worth was measured almost entirely by her ability to bear children, Hannah has been unable to conceive for years. And her husband has a second wife, a woman named Peninnah, who has children. Peninnah is cruel about it. The text says she provoked Hannah year after year to the point where Hannah could not eat. She wept and would not eat, year after year. Hannah goes to the temple at Shiloh. And here is what you need to notice. Not what she prayed, but how she prayed. The Hebrew text says Hannah prayed al-lev, which means literally upon the heart. Her lips were moving, but there was no sound coming out. In the ancient world, in the temple at Shiloh, in every house of worship across the ancient Near East, prayer was spoken aloud. You did not pray silently. That was not the custom. That was not the form. Silent prayer was so unusual that when the priest Eli watched Hannah from across the temple, he assumed she was drunk. Let that land for a moment. Hannah's prayer was so desperate, so raw, so far past the normal conventions of public worship that a trained religious leader thought she was intoxicated. This was not a composed request. This was not a polished petition. Hannah was not performing anything. She was breaking, and God answered. Within a year, Hannah held a son. His name was Samuel, and he would become one of the most significant figures in the entire history of Israel. Here's what most people miss. Hannah's prayer was not answered because she had the right technique. It was answered because of what she prayed inside that request. She made a vow, "If you give me a son, I will give him back to you." She wasn't keeping the gift. She was surrendering it before it arrived. She prayed for something and offered it back to God in the same breath. Hold on to that word. Surrender. We will come back to it. Now let's move forward roughly 300 years to Elijah. If you know Elijah, you know him as one of the most powerful figures in the entire Old Testament. He called fire down from heaven. He stood before kings and declared droughts. He is, by any measure, a towering presence. And after the greatest victory of his life, after calling fire from the sky on Mount Carmel, after the people fell on their faces and cried out that the Lord is God, Elijah collapsed. A woman named Jezebel sent him one message, a death threat. And this man who had just commanded fire from heaven ran for his life into the desert. He sat down under a small bush and prayed what might be the most honest prayer in the entire Bible. He asked God to let him die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." And then he lay down and slept. Pay attention to this. What did God do? He sent an angel, not to rebuke Elijah, not to correct him, not to preach a sermon at him. The angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." There was bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. Elijah ate. "Lay back down." The angel came a second time. "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." God answered Elijah's prayer. Just not the prayer Elijah asked for. Elijah asked to die. God responded with bread and water and rest, because God heard the prayer beneath the prayer. I have had enough. God heard exhaustion. God heard, I have nothing left. God answered what Elijah actually needed, not what he said he wanted. And there is one more thing about this story. When Elijah finally reached the mountain, after 40 days of walking, God did not appear in the great wind that tore the mountains apart. He did not appear in the earthquake. He did not appear in the fire. He appeared in what the Hebrew calls kol damama daka, a sound of fine silence, a thin, quiet sound. Some translate it as a still, small voice. Some call it a whisper. The exact translation is debated. The point is not the translation. The point is that the most powerful prophet in Israel was met by the quietest presence of God. Elijah needed bread before he needed an answer, and God knew the order. Now, Hezekiah. Hezekiah is one of the great kings of Judah. Scripture says there was no king before or after him who trusted God the way he did. But Hezekiah receives a message that would break any person. The prophet Isaiah walks in and delivers the verdict. Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover from this illness. No negotiation, no caveat. A prophet of God, speaking for God, telling a 40-year-old king, you are done. And this is where it gets remarkable. Hezekiah does not accept the verdict quietly. He does not manage his emotions or craft a composed response. He turns his face to the wall. He turns away from every other person in that room. And he prays. And he weeps bitterly. The text specifically says he wept bitterly. He was not holding himself together. He was not presenting faith. He was bringing what he actually had, which was grief, and he brought it directly to God. Before Isaiah had even left the middle courtyard of the palace, God stopped him and sent him back with a different message. I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I will add 15 years to your life. This is the only place in the entire Bible where God explicitly reverses a stated divine timeline because of a human prayer. Not because Hezekiah had earned it, not because he argued God into it, but because he turned his face to the wall and told the truth. He prayed, "Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully with a whole heart." He surrendered the outcome and put the case before God honestly. 3 people so far, 3 prayers, 3 completely different circumstances, and you are beginning to see something they all share. If this is your first time here, welcome. We do this every week. One video, one layer of scripture you may never have seen before. If you want to keep going deeper, subscribe now, because what we are about to look at next, Daniel's answered prayer, the prayer beneath the prayer, and what Jesus prayed in the darkest moment of his life, that is where this all comes together. Don't miss it. Let's go back to Daniel. You know he was thrown into the lion's den. But there is a prayer in Daniel chapter 9 that most people pass over entirely, and it may be the most instructive prayer in the whole Bible when it comes to understanding why God answers some prayers the way he does. Daniel is an old man. He has been in Babylon for decades. He is reading the scroll of Jeremiah and realizes that the 70 years of exile Jeremiah prophesied are nearly over. The time of return is approaching. And what does he do with that realization? He fasts. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. He confesses, not his own sin only, but the sin of his people, his ancestors, his kings. He takes on the weight of an entire nation's failure before God. He does not pray, "We have suffered enough, it is time to go home." He prays, "We have sinned. We have been wicked. We have not listened. To you, Lord, belongs righteousness. To us belongs open shame." He takes full responsibility for what went wrong, with nothing held back. Hold that thought, because the response he receives is staggering. The angel Gabriel arrives and says, "As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly loved." As soon as you began to pray. The answer was dispatched before Daniel finished the first sentence. Not because Daniel had accumulated enough spiritual credit, not because his fasting had unlocked some divine mechanism, but because of the shape of Daniel's prayer. No bargaining, no conditions, no demands, just, "We have nothing. You are righteous. Do with us what you will." And God had already begun to move before the words were finished. Now, Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a Jewish man serving as cupbearer to the Persian king. He receives word that Jerusalem is still in ruins, the walls broken down, the gates burned, the city exposed. He sits down and weeps. He mourns for days. He fasts and prays. And then the king notices that Nehemiah looks sad. The king asks what is wrong, and in the space between the king's question and Nehemiah's answer, a split second, the length of a breath, the Bible records this. "I prayed to the God of heaven," right there, in the middle of a conversation with the most powerful man in the known world. A one-breath prayer. Scholars call this an arrow prayer, a short, sharp appeal fired upward in the middle of real life. And immediately after that breath, Nehemiah makes his request. The king grants everything he asks for: safe passage, timber, letters of protection, an appointment as governor. But here is the thing about Nehemiah's arrow prayer. It was not answered because it was brief. God does not answer short prayers because they are short. God answered it because it was the visible tip of months of invisible foundation, weeks of weeping and fasting and seeking God in private. The one-breath prayer in the king's court was the surface expression of a very deep well. But it gets stranger, because the most troubling prayer in this entire study is not Daniel's. It is not Nehemiah's, it is Paul's. Paul writes to the church in Corinth about something he calls a thorn in the flesh. The Greek word he uses is skolops, the same word used for an execution stake. This was not a minor irritation. This was something driving through him. He calls it a messenger of Satan, and he prayed. 3 times he asked God to take it away. God said no. This is not a God who ignores pain. This is not a God who is indifferent to suffering. This is not a God who gives you a spiritual answer when you need a physical one. This is a God who answers the prayer beneath the prayer, and sometimes that answer looks nothing like what you asked for. 3 times Paul asked. 3 times the answer came back the same. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now, is that a comfort or something harder? It depends entirely on what you believe you need. If you believe what you need most is for the suffering to stop, then my grace is sufficient sounds like an excuse. It sounds like God saying, I could fix this, and I am choosing not to. And if you have ever prayed for something real, a diagnosis, a marriage, a door that will not open, a grief that will not lift, and received silence, or worse, I know you know what that lands like. But watch what Paul did with that answer. He wrote, Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. He received the no, he found what was inside it, and he turned the thorn into testimony. You are someone who is willing to sit with the hard parts of Scripture, and this is one of them. God does not always give us what we ask for. But the pattern across every story in this video is not that God ignores prayer. The pattern is that God answers the prayer beneath the prayer, the deeper need we cannot always fully articulate. And sometimes that answer to the deeper prayer looks, from the outside, like a no to the surface request. Paul asked for relief. God gave him power, not instead of the thorn, through it. And now we get to the garden. It is the night before the crucifixion. Jesus and his disciples have finished the Passover meal. They walk to an olive grove outside Jerusalem. The name of the grove is Gethsemane, and the name matters. Gethsemane comes from 2 Hebrew words, gath, meaning press, and shemen, meaning oil. Gethsemane is literally the oil press, the place where olives are crushed to release what is inside them. Jesus goes to pray in a garden named after crushing. He tells his disciples to wait. He takes Peter, James, and John a little further, and then he goes further still, alone, and falls on his face to the ground, and he prays. Matthew records his words as, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Read that again slowly, because this is the prayer. This is not a prayer of composed certainty. This is a prayer of honest anguish. Luke records that Jesus' sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground, a condition that physicians from the ancient world, through modern medicine, recognize as hematidrosis, where extreme psychological distress causes the small capillaries near the sweat glands to rupture. Jesus was not calmly accepting his fate. He was in documented physical agony, and in that agony he said, Not as I will, but as you will. He prayed it 3 times, the same number as Paul's thorn, the same honest return to the same request. And 3 times there was no rescue, no removal, no alternative path. Then an angel appeared, not to take away the cup, to strengthen him for what was coming. Now, was that prayer answered? The cup was not removed. He was not rescued from the cross. By every surface measure, the prayer of Gethsemane was unanswered. But look at what happened 3 days later. Look at what happened 50 days after that, when the Spirit fell on 120 people in an upper room. Look at every century since. Look at the 2 billion people alive today who carry the name of the man who prayed that prayer in the dark. The prayer of Gethsemane was the most answered prayer in human history. Not despite the cross, because of it. The surrender was not the obstacle to the answer. The surrender was the answer. There is a 3 a.m. feeling that every human being knows. The moment when you have run out of options, when the strategies are exhausted, when you are praying something like, "I don't know what to ask for. I don't know what I need. I just need you." That prayer, the one that rises out of emptiness rather than strategy, is the prayer that looks most like Gethsemane. And it is the prayer this entire video has been building toward. Augustine wrote it 15 centuries ago in words that have never been improved on. "Thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it repose in thee." For Augustine, prayer was not a transaction where you give God faith and God gives you results. Prayer was a return, the soul going back to the place it came from, and the prayer that receives an answer is the prayer that makes that return. Not the prayer with the right words, the prayer with the right posture. You are not coming to God with a technique. You are coming with what you actually have. A broken situation, an honest heart, and a willingness, however fragile, however faint, to say not what I want, but what you know I need. That is not resignation. That is not giving up. That is the most courageous thing a human being can do, to want something with everything you have and to offer it back anyway. If anything in this video has landed in a real place for you today, this is the right moment to subscribe and stay. We are here every week. One video, one layer of scripture worth going deeper in. I would love to see you in the next one. And here is the thing I promised you at the beginning, the open loop I planted in minute 1. Daniel prayed, and the angel arrived before he finished speaking. Not because Daniel had perfect faith, not because he had accumulated enough spiritual history, but because when Daniel prayed, he brought everything he had. Honest confession, no pretense, no bargaining, and surrendered the outcome completely to God. The prayer God always answers is not defined by its eloquence. It is not defined by its length. It is not defined by how much faith the person felt in the moment they prayed it. It is defined by its honesty and its surrender. Hannah's weeping, Elijah's exhaustion, Hezekiah's tears against the wall, Daniel's confession on behalf of a whole nation, Nehemiah's one breath, Paul's 3 unanswered pleas that became a testimony. Jesus in the oil press, every single one of those prayers was heard. Every one was answered. Not on the same timeline, not in the same way, but every one of them was seen by someone who does not lose track of a prayer. Here are 3 things to take with you. First, the prayer God answers is not the prayer of perfect faith. It is the prayer of honest surrender, bringing what you actually have with nothing hidden and meaning it when you say, "Your will, not mine." You do not have to have it together before you pray, you just have to be willing to tell the truth. Second, sometimes God's answer to your surface prayer is a no, because he is answering a deeper prayer you did not know you were praying. Paul's thorn became his testimony. The cross became the world's redemption. If you have been living with an unanswered prayer, it is worth asking, what is the prayer beneath the prayer? What do I actually need, not just what I have been asking for? Third, you are not forgotten. Every prayer in this video, Hannah's silent weeping, Elijah's request to die, Hezekiah's tears, Daniel's confession, Nehemiah's breath, Paul's 3 times asked plea, Jesus in the garden named for crushing, every single one was seen, every single one received an answer. Not always the answer they asked for, but every one of them was in the hands of someone who does not lose track of a single word. You are not someone who prays hoping God might be listening. You are someone who has learned today that God dispatched an angel before Daniel finished his sentence. You carry that now. It changes how you pray. If this video reached you in a real place, drop a comment below. Tell me what prayer you are still waiting on. Or tell me one prayer that was answered in a way you did not expect. I read every single one. Subscribe if you have not yet, and I will see you in the next video.